Okay, welcome to the Stageleft podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. On this episode, we speak to a man who has spent over 4 decades performing with and writing for some of the greatest artists in modern times. As well as having a hugely successful solo career, which included signing what was then the biggest solo deal in the history of Columbia Records, our guest today has collaborated with a seemingly endless list of esteemed musicians. Today we'll be finding out what it was like to be the lead male vocalist in Fleetwood Mac for a decade, what it's like to be Bob Dylan's guitarist on tour, and how one approaches writing songs for the likes of Ray Charles, Roy Orbison and Jerry Lee Lewis. It's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the Stageleft podcast is the legendary Billy Burnette. Thanks for joining us, Billy. How's it going?
Thank you, Chris, for having me. How are you doing over there?
We're very, very good. How's Nashville doing?
It's good. It's hot today. Hot and humid, but it's a nice day.
Nice one, nice one. Okay, I mean, obviously most interviews you've probably ever done in your career start with someone asking about the early years, and there's a very prevalent reason for that. It's because you released your first record aged 7 years old, I believe, with a major label.
I recorded it at Dot Records. I recorded at Gold Star Records in 1960 for Dot Records, and it was a Christmas song my dad and Joe Osborne had written, and it was with the with that famous band out in L.A. It was Rick Nelson's band, actually, and they were part of that deal they called the Wrecking Crew, at the time. So it was like, it was really exciting. It was, Hollywood was so different back then, It was like, I remember Rick Nelson coming up to us like on tiny nailers on his motorcycle and all the girls going crazy, and things like that. But it was a great experience.
What do you remember those first 7 years of your life? I mean, most kids are going to school, but your father was and your uncle was in a band that influenced. We're going to get onto this, but the likes of Elvis, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Bob Dylan, they all cited your father and uncle's band, for influencing them. So, what do you remember those first 7 years and how that led to you recording your first song?
I just kind of fell into it. I started performing with the Rock and Roll Trio. I got up and did a song with them when I was about 3.5, so it was kind of just in my blood. And then when we moved to Hollywood, I thought that there was so many musicians and people. My uncle was in it, my dad was in it. I thought everybody played music. I thought it was just a part of our life, just part of everybody's life,
Cool. And tell us a story about how the name Rockabilly came about, because you're actually the reason Rockabilly, that term is used. Is that right?
Well, they wrote the song Rockabilly Boogie in 1953. And my cousin and myself, my cousin Rocky Burnette and myself, who was Johnny Burnett's son, they wrote the song called Rockabilly Boogie. And that's what made the name kind of famous, was the Rockabilly Boogie. And it came out on some little label, so it kind of made the name famous, and it just spread, so.
Incredible.
A lot of people say rockabilly's, rock and roll and hillbilly music, and it's a little of that, but they actually coined the phrase rockabilly for the first time.
Well, I know a little spot on the edge of town where you can really pick them up and set them down. It's a little place called Hideaway. You do the rockabilly to the break of day. Well, it's a rockabilly boogie.
When I was about 11, I did another record for Herb Alpert, who was part of the A&M, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and he produced me on a Dr. Zeus song. So I did that, and it was on TV quite a bit, and it was a song called Just Because We're Kids, written by Dr. Zeus. And Herbie produced that record, so I ended up being on that label, I think, 3 times in my life. I was then again on it, I think, when I was about 17 or 18.
And the people you were hanging around at that age with, were they also in the entertainment industry in some form, or were their parents, or were you kind of a standalone in that?
I guess I started taking my guitar to the beach. I was a Valley boy, so, grew up, we all came out from Memphis. And then we moved over into the Valley, San Fernando Valley. So I would hitchhike to the beach with my guitar when I got older, and sit around and play songs on the beach all day and learn stuff. And I was a huge Beatle fan, so I learned a lot of that stuff, and like everyone. And just kind of picked up. There were guitars all around the house, so I finally picked one up one day and started playing it. And then I had a couple lessons earlier on, but not many. And then I was off to writing songs. So I wrote songs, and when I turned about 18, my dad took me down to meet this guy, Chips Moman, who had just produced Elvis Presley and Suspicious Minds and Elvis back in Memphis, and had done the Box Tops records down there, The Letter. They did the Hooked on a Feeling by B.J. Thomas, and did a lot of really cool records. So I went down there a week out of high school. I was signed to Columbia Records with Chips.
Wow. What a mentor to have, because I know another guest we had on the Stageleft podcast, I think you know, Shane Keister. He talked a lot about working with Chips, and what a legend that guy was. One of the things I just want to come back to is you were influenced by the Beatles, and that's fascinating because your father's music influenced the Beatles themselves. Is that right? Because I think McCartney and Lennon, or was it McCartney who came up to you and said that he was familiar with your father's work?
Well, I met him at the Forum when he played the Forum when he was with Wings, and he asked for Mick Fleetwood. I was in Fleetwood Mac at the time, and he asked, some girl came up and asked me and Mick to come back, and there was everybody in Hollywood was there that night, and I was really excited, getting to meet Paul. So I went back, and he held my hand for a while, and finally, he turned around to me and said, I go to introduce myself. He goes, I know who you are, mate. I keep up. And then he said, John and I, every morning when we'd get up in our little flat in Liverpool, would put on the Johnny Burnette Rock and Roll Trio album, and it was really influenced us a lot. And they actually cut Lonesome Tears in My Eyes on the BBC tapes.
This is a Dorsey Burnette number, brother of Johnny Burnette, called Lonesome Tears in My Eyes, recorded on their very first LP in 1822. Ha. Well, baby, 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 blues of sorrow, and I love you tomorrow, just suit you just fine. Well, baby, 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 blues of sorrow, I love you tomorrow, just suit you just fine. I can't forget that you told me so many promising lies. I'm trying to forget these lonesome tears in my eyes.
I know Paul did on Run Devil Run. He did the version that my dad and uncle did of Honey Hush, because they took an old blues song and made it more rocking, So Paul still does that, I think, in a set once in a while.
Run Devil Run is definitely an album that you can see that influence has come about. You can definitely see your father's influence. And I'm
a huge McCartney fan. I saw him here in Nashville not too long ago, and he was great as usual,
Great stuff. And I think also Ringo Starr was quite a fan of some of your music. He did a kind of a video, didn't he, talking about
how... he did it. He said it was one of his favorite records of that summer. It was a live record I did in Manhattan. I called it Memphis in Manhattan. And we did it in a church. It was one of those ones where we had to do it live, live to tape. So it was there was no overdubs on it. Ringo liked that part about it. And he also he did a remake of my uncle's song. It wasn't my uncle's song. He didn't write it, but he did You're 16, You're Beautiful, and Your Mind had a big hit on it. And when I saw him at Wembley Stadium, he had told me that he changed. He walked out of my dreams into my car on his version. And I think he was really proud of that, because at the time, Billy Ocean, he goes, I think that's where that Billy Ocean got that idea to do out of my dreams into my car, too. So... Wow. He was proud of that line that he'd written in that song, or changed.
Fantastic. And it's just beautiful that, you were sat, you one of the first reasons you picked up a guitar was listening to their music, and they influenced you, and then to have that crossover is just, the fact it's gone full circle is wonderful. So you released a number of albums, obviously in your kind of teen and your early 20s. Again, go back to the question I kind of mentioned earlier. What do you think you were trying to accomplish there? What was your goal? What were you trying to get to?
I had just started writing music. I was kind of late into coming into the songwriter thing, so I think I probably started writing about 16 or 17. And I'd written, some songs. And when I went up to see Chips, he put me with some of his people there. And just that was my kind of like going to college or whatever, started making an album, So I made my first album then, and really didn't have any kind of concept. I didn't set out to be rockabilly or country, or because back then you kind of just mixed it up as a singer-songwriter. You could have anything from an R&B song on there to a rock and roll song. So I did a little bit of everything on that record, my first record. But in hindsight, you know, I wish I'd have had more of a concept, you know, of to what I was doing. But I didn't. I was kind of all over the place when I started.
How did you feel about following in your father and uncle's footsteps? Did you feel that was? Did you feel any pressure? Or did you enjoy? Did you embrace that?
I lost my dad when I was about 25, and my uncle we lost when, I guess I must have been about 13 or 14. He passed away in 1964, and lost. You know, like I say, I lost my dad pretty young, so he really didn't get to see anything I had achieved as a songwriter or whatever by then. You know, it was like things didn't really start happening to me good for me until about I was 26, 27. And got my own band and started working. I mean, we backed my dad right before he died and did a lot of stuff with him. But I really didn't know about his rockabilly stuff until he passed away. Then I really got into that. And somebody said, you should do an album like that. And I got on the LA, all the band scene was really hot in LA at the time. So I got a 4-piece band and started hitting the clubs. And before I knew it, you know, I had a bidding war going on with the labels, and it was I was about 27 at that time. And but to answer your question about, of course, he had an influence on me. I mean, I loved his music, and I loved the music he was making at the time. He produced Stevie Wonder at the time when I was a kid. He came home one day and said, "Listen to this guy I just produced," and it was Stevie Wonder. And I went, "Geez, it's great." You know, we sat laid down on the shag rug and would listen to the music, you know, and I mean, he did a lot of important things, and he hung around, his friends were like Glenn Campbell and Roger Miller, so there was always a lot of really talented people hanging around the house, you know. Great.
Thank you for speaking about that. So obviously you started to make yourself a bit of a name for yourself in your solo career. Before obviously you got the call from I think it was Mick Fleetwood, and you were playing in lots of bands. I know you played in, was it Zoo? Is the name of the band?
The Zoo was how I got into Fleetwood Mac. Actually, Lindsey Buckingham put it together as the Cholos, and we went to do Saturday Night Live was my first gig with them. Went to do I Think I'm in Trouble, and Lindsey wanted to start this band with just the guys in it. And we started the band, and Christine started hanging with us some, and then Stevie would come out to some gigs. And so I kind of just, I had met Mick at a Dick Clark 25-year anniversary party. And at the time, it was the Zoo, I was still a solo artist. I was still signed to MCA Records. And in '85, I was nominated for Best New Country Male Vocalist, you know. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even set out to do a country record, but I was always one of those guys that was on the fence of, you know, whether I was doing it. And I did the record in L.A., and it jumped on the country charts and started doing well. And I was nominated for that album. It was a song that me, Steve Cropper and myself had written.
Try me. Try me. Now don't be shy, just feel at ease. I know I got just what you need. I know that I can help you, girl.
I was a huge fan and had heard their stuff with my dad one day at an office. Somebody was playing me the Buckingham Nicks album, and that stuck in my mind as being really great because I was a big Delaney and Bonnie fan. Mm-hmm. So when I heard Buckingham Nicks, I really liked them, and I don't think that record did very much. But then when they came out with Fleetwood Mac, I was just a huge fan. I mean, I was such a big fan, I would sit there and wait for the songs to come on the radio and record them off, you know. Wow. The albums in its entirety. I was one of those guys that had the dual cassette thing that would record them.
So you must have been split.
I was such a big fan that when it came time for me to join the band, it was just, I was in the studio with Roy Orbison, and Mick had called, and I'd already been playing with Mick a lot and with John some, and already played with Lindsey, and I got the call. I was in the studio with Roy Orbison was cutting one of my songs for the Mystery Girl album, a song called All I Can Do Is Dream You, and I was playing on it. And Rick Vito happened to be there that day with me. And Mick goes, hey, you know that kid the other night? He goes, he goes, I want you guys to join the band. And I go, when? And he goes, tomorrow. And I was signed to MCA at the time, MCA Curb, so I had to go home and call Mike Curb. And my first hour was me explaining how I needed to join the band. The first was him telling me why I needed not to join the band and stay as a solo artist, because I had just started to do well at the time.
You must have had some reservations because of your own career was doing so well, but then such a fantastic group to be joining, because it was post Rumours, so they were huge acts at the time.
It was a huge overnight. I mean, it was like an overnight. It's hard to describe. I mean, you get asked to join one of the biggest bands in the world. I mean, what are you going to say? No. So I got all my papers in order, and we were there. I think the next day we did like Good Morning America and the Today Show and a blitz on TV to explain that there would be 2 members coming out instead of Lindsey on this next tour. Because Stevie and Lindsey had gotten to a big fight. I guess he kind of got physical with her at one of the meetings, and that was it for him. They kind of ousted him out of the band. And I was kind of I'd already been doing stuff with. I had actually worked with Fleetwood Mac. I think I was one of the few people that was in the studio with them that sang on a couple of parts, and I'd written some lyrics to a couple of songs on the record, helped them out there, and so I was already kind of in the family. Yeah,
certainly. Because I think they appeared. There was Christy McVie appeared on one of your records as well in 1985.
Yes.
Is that right? Was it the Try Me album?
The Try Me album, yes.
Yeah.
And Christine and I wrote. In fact, we wrote a few songs that we wrote for the Behind the Mask album. And her and I had been writing before that anyway, and we'd written. In fact, I wrote a song on our solo record, which I thought was really a good piece. And there was one time in the Mac when some of them had quit. There was only 4 members. It was Christine, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, and myself. And we did 4 tracks. We did 2 tracks for one of the box set albums. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I've got a few questions about being in Fleetwood Mac. One of the first questions is that did you feel a lot of pressure stepping into Lindsey Buckingham's shoes? I know that you knew him and you played with him, but he had a very not unusual style of playing guitar, but it was slightly unusual way of playing.
Oh yeah, but I offered him a pick one day because I noticed he didn't have one, and he goes, "I don't use one." That's the first time I found out he didn't use a pick. So
is that why they got 2 guitarists? Is that why you got 2 people in? Was it so that you could sing his parts and then the other guitarist would be playing the part?
Yeah, but before we joined, I don't think they ever. In fact, Lindsey was kind of like known for not playing what was on the record. So what we gave him when I joined the band, we gave him the actual record. I mean, it's we tried to sound as much like, he'd put like a couple of guitars on there and didn't have anybody up there with him to do that. So Rick and I learned of the parts that were on the records and played them. And I knew a lot of them already and knew a lot of the songs. So me stepping into it was, and I think we did a few of them with the Zoo,
Yeah,
we do like World Turning and Oh Well, and so I already knew a lot of that stuff.
If you wake up and don't want to smile, if it takes just a little while, open your eyes and look at the day. You'll see things in a different way. So don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Don't stop, it'll soon be here. It'll be better than before. Yesterday's gone.
Tell us about what you remember from the first time you walked into the full rehearsal and obviously locking into a vocal harmony with Christine and Stevie. Not many people say they could, can say they've done that. It sounds beautiful. I've obviously heard recordings of it. What do you remember of that time?
It was, of course it was scary walking into it. It was, because Lindsey sang a lot higher than I did. But I just had to, when you got to do something, you just practice and do it until you can do it. I learned a lot doing that because toward the middle part of the tour, I could do it with ease, but the voice is a muscle just like anything else. If you work at it and do it, it gets better and stronger. So I did that, and halfway through the tour, I felt great. Our first date was in Kansas City, So we didn't know what was actually going to happen. But when it actually did, I think after the first night, everybody was like relieved that, you know, it was going to be smooth sailing after that.
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. You can't disguise. No, you can't disguise. Tell
You
me
know,
lies.
the stars of the group was Mick, and, you know, because he's so tall, I mean, and Stevie. I mean, the rest of them can walk into, like, clubs and people don't know who they are, and, you know, they just can walk around like normal people, you know. And for some reason, I don't know if it's because Stevie and Lindsey were the only ones on the cover of Rumors or what it was, you know, but she was definitely the centerpiece for that band, you know.
Absolutely. And tell me...
And Christine's written, like, most of the hits to the band, you know, so it's like, it's a weird deal, but it's like... when Stevie walks on stage, you know, and the band's already in place, it goes up to another level.
Can you tell me about a song that you wrote? I believe you wrote it. It's certainly a song that you did as a duet that's absolutely beautiful, the two of you singing. It's called Are You Mine?
Are You Mine? That was Stevie and I did that, yes.
Yeah, tell us about that song.
That song, that was before I joined Fleetwood Mac. In fact, she called and said, I want to do this song called All You Mine, and I want you to sing it with me. Jimmy Iovine was producing it. And it was a wild night because Prince was out in the back playing basketball. It was out the studio. And we had Brian Setzer on the session. I think Mick was playing drums. And it's a pretty exciting night. It went all night.
Are you mine? Yes, I am. All the time. Yes, I am. Mine alone. Yes, I am. On my own. No one else will ever do. I'll be yours and I'll be true. Don't worry. Have no fear, 'cause I'm yours.
You know, back then, who wouldn't want to sing with Stevie Nicks? Or even now, you know.
And tell me, what could a young performer would have, or singer would have learnt from the working practice of Stevie? Was there anything particular that made her stand out from the rest, or anything you particularly remember about her working practices that made her such an amazing singer?
You know what? She was at it 24/7. I mean, whether we were on the jet or whether we were on a bus or the train, or she was always into art, whether it was writing, drawing, painting. I mean, 24/7, just always doing something with her art. So she's like dedicated into that thing, like I think more than anybody I've ever met, probably.
When did she make you cry, make you break down, shatter your illusions of love? And is it over now? Do you know how? Pick up the pieces and go home. When did she make you cry, make you break down, shatter your illusions of love? Now tell me, is it over now? Do you know how? Pick up the pieces and go home.
Obviously, there was an incredibly complex set of relationships within the band. How do you think the band, obviously you knew them before you joined as well. I've always been fascinated how Rumours ever got made. You know, how did, you know, the band create an atmosphere of artistic freedom and creativity in such an often hostile and emotionally complex environment? How do you think they actually made that album?
I think that's what created a lot of the fire and made it them better, you know, was the friction between some of them, you know, because Stevie and Lindsey were going together and they broke up during the band, and Mick in his book said they were having an affair at the time, and then Christine and John, you know, got divorced, and
The lighting director and all that.
Christine was going with one of the guys in the Beach Boys. What's the drummer's name from Beach Boys? Dennis Wilson.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there was and I came on the scene with them early 80s, you know, that's when I met them and started hanging out with them. And I was with, I think when I was with Columbia Records, I would see them in New York and hang with them all night, you know, after a gig. And we just got to be, we got to be really tight friends, you know.
Great.
And what's really weird about it is that I was like probably one of their biggest fans in the world, you know. So for me, it was just crazy.
Christine said that when you joined, it was like a blood transfusion for the band. It really revitalised them. You know, the first night at Kansas City, you said that you were waking in sweats the nights before and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you did the Behind the Mask tour and you were playing at sold out shows at Wembley Stadium, tell us, when you play these high profile concerts, what do you do with the nervous energy beforehand? You know, how do you approach playing these really high profile to large numbers of people, or perhaps these Saturday Night Live shows that you know that are going to be broadcast to millions of people? How do you stay relaxed in the hours running up to it?
Well, that's I get more nervous on the TV stuff than I do on a live gig. For some reason, Saturday Night Live is a scary thing to do when you're doing it live and you're singing live. I mean, there's a million things that could go wrong, and you got such a short time to put the band and everything together. I remember one night we did it. I've done it twice. One night I did it. We didn't have the bass on. They couldn't get the bass working until boom, right? It was airtime. So those things are kind of tricky, and I get, for some reason, I'm more nervous in doing a talk show or TV stuff than I ever am at a gig. I just feel I don't get the nervous thing for some reason. And Fleetwood Mac, to be honest, I mean, they would be nervous as hell before we did, especially at Wembley. We did 10 days at the Wembley Arena, and then we did a date at Wembley Stadium,
Yeah.
But I think Fleetwood Mac's biggest gig at the time, I think it was 127,000 people there just for them that night. And we had done a lot of festivals where there was 300,000 or 400,000, of course, those big open air festivals, And to me, those are, I have a lot of fun doing those. I love them.
Fantastic. And when you are dealing with kind of your nerves beforehand and that kind of thing, and just for young musicians listening in, do you have any rituals, or do you, how do you kill those 2 hours beforehand where you're ready to go, but you have to kind of hang around?
I kind of I like to play a little bit before and sing and loosen it up. I like to get in a room by myself and yell out, sing out some stuff, and probably, I would go through Go Your Own Way or something like that, something really high up to get the voice opened up. And I used to have a little bit to drink before I went on, but now I don't do that anymore because I kind of I had one night where the balance went all wrong. So I stopped doing that.
Sensible. I've performed Go Your Own Way, and you're right, it's ridiculously high. It's right up there.
Yeah, just hit the high notes and hit the low ones. And I'd actually been to a vocal teacher named Seth Riggs who was like Michael Jackson's and Madonna's and a lot of people. Taught him a lot of vocal exercises because I knew I had a challenge to get up there in Lindsey's range,
Mm-hmm.
So I had the time and the money, so I thought I'd just go to the best there was in Hollywood. So
You can go your own way, go your own way. You can call it another lonely day, another lonely day. You can go your own way, go your own way.
And is it right on the final show of that particular tour, Lindsey Buckingham came on stage? Is it in Los Angeles? Do you remember that?
Yes, he came on stage in Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Right, okay. And how was
great. I had no problem with it. It was great. He came up, and it was really exciting for us to have him sit in.
Fantastic.
Because we do tours. I did 3 or 4 world tours with him, and they last a year. Those tours, because you do 3 months, 10 days off, 3 months in Europe, 10 days off, 3 months back in the States. Then you go to Scandinavia. They kind of split it up that way, and then Australia and Japan. So it's a year, good year. You're out on the road.
And any pressures of touring for that long that we don't see? How do you deal with touring away for a year?
Well, we had a family week. Each country we'd go to, like in England, we'd bring the family over for a week and call it Family Week. So they had their wives and whoever had kids would come over. We did the same in Australia. Say we were going to be there for a month or two, so it'd kind of break it up. But it's tough. It's hard on you miss a lot of stuff. You miss a lot of your kids' things at school and stuff like that. But it's part of our life. I'm on the road still all the time.
Yeah.
I just got off the road being 6 weeks in Europe. So
right,
yeah, I'm still at it.
You're coming up to 6 weeks in Europe?
I just got
Oh,
got home. I did a festival in Barcelona, Rockabilly Festival. Then I went up and I toured with this band called the Cadillac Band.
Right.
They went over there last year with James Burton, and they like to have an American guest. So Stella Parton, Dolly's sister, and myself went over this time and did about 5 weeks with them. And I'm getting ready to go to Italy. I'm doing one in north of Venice here at the end of the month. Next week, as a matter of fact.
Oh, great.
Over to one there. And then going up to Canada, I have a classic rock band I do that's some members from various bands, like the drummer from Boston, Curly Smith, and the guitar player from Aerosmith, Jimmy Crespo. So we are able to do all these songs. You know, a lot of bands have done that are no longer in those bands. So I do a few Fleetwood Mac things in that, and it's good. It's a lot of fun.
Great. And can I talk about your songwriting now? I mean, obviously you've done some amazing, you've written so many songs and they've obviously been covered by other artists or you've written for other artists. I know one key song that you wrote, I think you co-wrote it, was a tune called Do I Ever Cross Your Mind? And that was for Ray Charles, and that featured on his final album, I believe, that it recorded album. Tell us, how do you go about writing a song for different musicians? Do you second guess yourself about what they would like to be performing, or do you just do what you want to do and see how it goes?
You know, just about all the songs I've written, I think the only one I wrote specifically for somebody was David Malloy, and I wrote the song for Roy Orbison, thinking Roy, writing it directly for Roy. I think that's probably the only time I've done that. And we kind of did the song as he would, thinking of him while we wrote it. And we went out and taught it to him, and then he cut it, and I got to play on it, and sing on it with him. And that was a huge thrill. The Ray Charles thing was an artist I wrote it with, Michael Smotherman, who first did it on his record. And then he played it for Ray up at Glenn Campbell's house one night. And Ray Charles had a hit on it in 1985. But it's been a single by Cher, by Tom Jones.
Right.
It's been cut by a lot of people. I mean, and a lot of acts. I can't even remember right now how many people have done it, but it's probably one of my most covered songs. And then Ray did it on his last album.
What's your favourite version of it?
My favourite version is Ray Charles' version of it. I mean, when he does one of your songs, it's like, I'll never do it like anybody else but him now, since he's done it. I mean, he to me was one of the masters of, singing and his phrasing, and it was just magic,
And do you ever wonder what became of all the time? Honey, do I ever cross your mind?
So where does your lyrical and even chord inspiration come from when you've written hundreds and hundreds of songs? I mean, there must have been times where you've sat there and kind of there's a blank sheet in front of you and you've got maybe writer's block, both from a lyrical point of view and actually as a guitarist and a composer.
Yeah, well, sometimes it starts with a lick. Sometimes I'll get a lick and just be playing on it and then wait to get with somebody. I do a lot of co-writing. So I'll get a lick, and then if somebody has a melody, and I'm always thinking of ideas for songs, like they usually come out of conversation, like something that we'll be talking about, maybe come out while we're talking, and I'll write it down and save it for when I get ready to write again. So a lot of them just fall out of the sky. A lot of them are, the good ones come quick, and they're gifts, I believe. So that's been really great. We just recently, last few years, had a big #1 with George Strait, so that was a big thrill for us as well.
That was like his 44th #1, I believe, as well, something like that.
It was his 57th #1, and he was 57 that day.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. But what about, I mean, okay, so what was the longest period that you went through without writing new material?
Probably, I've been writing now, but I don't do it as much as I used to because I'm working so much, I'm on the road so much, and I don't write a lot on the road. I just kind of am fidgety out on the road sometimes, so I just write when I get home. I'll get a lot of ideas on the road. And I have a lot of ideas even now in my, put them down on my phone or whatever. You can put them down. But back in the old days, my dad used to just write, like he wrote It's Late, got up out of sleep one night and wrote one of Rick Nelson's biggest hits in about 5 minutes and went back to sleep and remembered it the next morning,
So many are forgotten like that, though, aren't they? So many musicians say they think of the song, it's in their head, and they wake up the next morning and it's gone. So it's a good job he recorded that one.
It's really something that I don't know how they didn't have as much recording equipment as we have today. We could just pick up a phone and put it down on there. My dad did have a little tape recorder at the house that he used to put down ideas on, but a lot of that stuff they just pick it out and have to remember it, So it's a lot easier for us today, You get ideas and you put something down and then put it down your ideas on drums or whatever, all of them really quick.
And I know your last album, I think, was the first album you produced yourself.
Yes.
How different was that for you to do that? And tell us why you went down that route.
I've never done it before. I'm doing one now that way. I went in and cut the tracks, and I take it home and I take my time and work on it. And I bounce ideas off different people who come in and play on it. And I have a studio in my house, so I do the tracks at the main studio. I'm in the process now of going and having it mixed in the next couple of weeks and getting ready to put it out. And I've never done that. Something that I wanted to do. Now I want to do it again.
Great. And do you find
it did well? And you can get this record, by the way, if you can put this on your show, you can get it at billyburnette.net. You can pick up my records there.
Can I talk about, obviously you did a tour with Bob Dylan. I think you only played about a month or so with him.
Yeah, I did. I did actually a couple of months with him. I did a lot of rehearsing. Not a lot of rehearsing. We rehearsed for a few days in L.A., and then I went to Australia with him, and it was really opened my, I'm a huge fan. Who isn't? And I think I learned 120 songs in like a month and a half or something. It was like we'd only get the set list 5 minutes before the show started. We got it 20 minutes before the show started, and there would be probably 5 new songs in there I'd have to learn like really quick.
Really?
Yeah, so it was challenging.
And for anybody who hasn't seen Bob Dylan live, luckily I have. I saw him in Chicago a few years ago, but obviously he plays the songs very, very differently as they are on the record. So were you learning them as they were on record and then having to kind of adapt on the day?
That's the thing. What happened to me was they sent me all of his catalog on records that were like old records, and they've all changed now. So the whole band was laughing at me. One day they go, "You learned what?" From what? I go, "I learned from the records." And he goes, "Man, it's all different now. It's, different." He might change the key from night to night, He goes, this sounds better in this key today, so he might do things like that. But, it was a wild ride, but I really loved it.
What could a singer-songwriter like yourself, or any singer-songwriter, have learned from the working practices working as closely as you did as someone as great as Bob Dylan?
Well, he's a very private person, but we talked a lot about my dad and my uncle, and he was a fan of some of their music. He was a big Rick Nelson fan, so he really liked that stuff. And I had actually met him in the '70s, and he told me that my dad's song, "The Tall Oak Tree," he said, "You realize that's the first ecology song ever written?" And I called my dad the next morning. I said, "Hey, Dad, I ran into Bob Dylan last night." He goes, "That's neat, And I couldn't do the song right after. I couldn't do the song before that. I couldn't do the song in Hiroshima, and I couldn't do it in Japan because the tall oak tree was the mushroom cloud.
Oh,
and
right.
That's what it stood for. So I couldn't do the song over there. So I learned a little bit that the song had some weight to it, but didn't realize. In fact, somebody said after my dad died, you never know how big the tree is until it falls, because it was like he had so many fans of his in the music business that it was overwhelming. What they did a big show at the Forum in Los Angeles for him to celebrate, his loss and everything. And celebrate his music. And it was Roger Miller, Delaney and Bonnie, Glenn Campbell, with just a whole bunch of people. Chris Christopherson, a lot of people came out and did that.
Wow, thank you for talking about that. In regards to Bob, I know you said he was obviously a very private person. What do you think the reasoning was for the different versions of songs? Was it just the keys he was singing them in, or was there more to it? Because I've been at shows where his material, he'll be playing Like a Rolling Stone, and he's unrecognisable. You don't realise till halfway through.
I know, and I think it's just maybe he's been doing them for so long, he kind of has fun with them and changes them up. I don't really know,
Right.
When I was with him, though, he was really articulate, and I'd been to some shows where he wasn't so. And but while I was with him, and it was a great band. I took Charlie Sexton's place, who's a great guitar player. So I was there for about a month and a half, and then his manager, Jeff Kramer, managed. They were just putting together a band for John Fogerty, so I thought that Jeff thought that I might be really good for that gig. And I think Charlie maybe had come back or something at the time. I just did that, tour while he was out. And so when they put together the thing for John Fogerty, Bob's manager called me and said, I think you'd be really good for this, since he hadn't toured in a long time, And so I went out to L.A. and played with John, and it's funny because he was a big fan of my dad and uncles also, And a bass player, George Hawkins, and myself worked up the parts on the phone. So when we got there, we kind of knew him really well because we knew we were going to be playing together with John. So we had our parts down, and John was impressed by that, so we got the gig.
Fantastic. And you played many big gigs with him.
I think I spent like 6 years with him there, with John.
Yeah, fantastic. And from what could people learn from him as a musician or as an artist? Anything that stood him out from the rest? Can you remember any specific kind of things that he did that made him different, and or techniques that he had?
He'd sound checks more than anybody I ever worked for. I mean, we'd run through the whole show every day almost.
Wow.
Yeah, no matter if it was 120 outside or whatever the thing was, we would go through the set every day.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and he's pretty, and he still sings the songs in the same keys. A lot of artists have dropped them down since they were, when they were younger. He's still hitting them at the same keys and hitting the notes right on the spot, so he's amazing.
Given the caliber of the people you've worked with, would you say there's a common personality trait or a number of personality trait that highly successful musicians have that sets them apart from perhaps amateur musicians?
Well, I tell you what's weird about all these guys that I've worked with, like the really big ones, all of them have been Geminis. Bob's a Gemini, Stevie Nicks is a Gemini, John Fogerty's a Gemini. So you never know what you're going to get.
But I mean, obviously, it's got to be more to it than that. But I mean, what do you think? Is there any particular personality traits, or just is it hard work, or is it It
is. You know what? It is hard work, and it is being dedicated to your craft and whatever It's like it is. I mean, I wish I'd have realized that a lot earlier in my career. That I wish I'd have taken it a little more serious, because I was kind of a party boy and I'd never done anything else, so it came to me so easy that I just kind of fluffed it off as being just part of my life, and this is what I do. I wish I'd have been more serious about it, but I probably didn't, till years later, and even then I was, kind of, I don't know, I was always the one in Fleetwood Mac with come on, can we be serious now, Billy? Because we were always joking around and doing stuff, but it is. I mean, you have to take it serious because it's big business,
Cool.
And there's a lot of people relying on you. When you're in a band like that, it's not, it's like hundreds of people are working, we had 18 trucks, I don't know how many buses, and then we had a private jet, full of people. So it's like a big giant circus hitting the road,
I love that, giant circus hitting the road. This particularly apt for Fleetwood Mac, perhaps, sometimes.
It was something. I mean, the night we first took off for the road and all the trucks came on, that's when you realize how big this thing really is,
Great.
And we had some people. We had couple of stages that were rigged, and one night it started buckling, and we all had to run off the stage. And you play out there in the when you're playing outside, you're playing to, especially in the States, we had a stage get completely blown away with Fogerty down in Sturgis when the tornado just came through and just blew the whole stage apart.
Wow.
So it's kind of stuff. I mean, they've had a couple of accidents over here with that kind of stuff, with stages falling on people and stuff. And security is important. We had especially with Fleetwood Mac and with Dylan, had a lot of security, because those guys, there's people that for some reason want to get them, especially Stevie had a couple of death threats while we were out, and we'd have the FBI out, out a few times. And there's some weird fans, fans come from fanatics, they're just, there's some fans that are just, I still have some that I get letters from that are still kind of crazy people that write me letters from them days still,
Well, they're probably listening to this, so... Okay, what advice would you give to musicians to stay loose in recording sessions to avoid kind of the red light fever? The red light fever where kind of...
Yeah, I kind of go in these days when I go in the studio and you get so many chances to do a track and so many chances to sing. Like back in the old days, they did it all at once. That's why I respect those guys so much. I mean, even Elvis would do it until he got the vocal, until he got his vocal right, where they did it like 50 times or just over and over and over till you get it, And my dad's records, there was no overdubbing back then because there was mono machines, So now with the multi-tracking, especially with Pro Tools and everything, you can work magic out of, anything. So it's a different world today.
We'll begin to wrap up. One question I did have for you was, what concerns do you have about the music industry in the future? Where do you see the music industry being in 30 years? And any concerns you have, how might they be addressed?
Well, the problem with us right now, and even with Hollywood, is the downloading of our music, and it's like, it's fallen. I mean, the business is literally like folded up since I've, in the last 5 years or so. I mean, because of the internet, we've lost so much music, and you could, there's sites that you can go to and get anything for free. There's sites where you can go to and download movies that come out the same day. So our whole business has been compromised,
Where do you see it in 30 years? Do you think that will be addressed?
Hopefully it will get better, and they'll figure out some of this stuff. Technically, to where it's so harder to steal the music. So far, I haven't seen, they have blocks on different things, and iTunes is doing well. And there's hope. There's still hope. I mean, there's Apple's got something new program that they're, I think it's all going to be subscription radio in the future. And that's where we'll make our money, and as writers and artists, And it's all moving toward that way, where you subscribe to something, because I think commercial radio, even they're talking about it here, days are numbered, You know what? I still want to write that great song. I'm still always driven about writing that great song, and still I'm working with the band, and I just finished working on an album in Stockholm, which I'm really proud of, with these guys called the Tennessee Tears. And still doing fresh stuff like that is really important to me. And, hey, I've been blessed even to make a living out of it this long. I mean, I'm 62 now, and I have been extremely blessed to have never have done anything else. So I feel so blessed to just be still doing this. It's amazing.
Fantastic. And where can we find out more about your work and obviously new recordings that you have coming out and previous back catalogue? It's billyburnette.net, is that right?
You can go to billyburnette.net and buy the records, or and see some of the videos. I think we got a little thing. I'll be doing some new stuff here with the new record. Will probably be out end of this year, early next year.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for appearing on the Stageleft podcast, Billy. You've played on music that will be listened to for many, many generations, and your work has been admired by millions. So thanks for you giving us your insight today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to the next chapter in your musical journey.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Good stuff.
Thank you so much.
You said it hurts me more than it does to you. Then why am I turning all these shades of blue? You had me thinking it was paradise. All of a sudden it was cold thin ice. I'm falling under trying to catch my breath. This is a matter of life and death. You set me up to let me down. You took the love I couldn't live without. Two fatal words, bye-bye. Without your love, you know I'd surely die.
To keep in the loop of other episodes of the Stageleft podcast, go to www.thestageleftpodcast.com, follow us on Twitter at The Stageleft Pod, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Stageleft Podcast. See you next time.